I think in this generation of amp modelers, we are there where the product is almost indistinguishable from the real thing. But given the option, I would still prefer to have a real amplifier with real gain staging that feels right, that I can grab and dial in and record with that and not be going through a user interface on an amp modeler.
That's Michael Caporizzo, although I call him Caps. Caps is a friend and colleague of mine from Ithaca College, where he serves as the director of the sound and recording program. He's also a successful classical and electric guitar player. Caps comes to us today to answer all our questions about how electric guitars work, how he likes to record them, and lots more. Let's get started.
Hey, Luke. How's it going, man?
Hey, Tyler. Hello, Michael. Should I call you Michael or should I call you Caps?
You know what? That's actually a good question because this is kind of the
I've never asked you.
we're at the intersection of my two identities here. Call me Caps because it's weird to hear Mike or Michael from you. That's funny because the counseling center at Ithaca College is also called CAPS. It's an acronym for counseling something. So my students have gotten a little confused when they talk about me with other students at the college that don't know me. They know the counseling center. So when they go to an advising meeting for me, they have to clarify that they're going to, now they're calling me lower caps rather than like upper caps.
Because it's an all cap. Yeah, it's funny when it's like, if you're having academic troubles, go talk to Caps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but
academic troubles.
Of course, you're also an academic advisor, so you also can help students with their academic troubles.
Yeah, there's a Venn diagram, and there is a cross-section in there.
And for people that don't know you, why do you go by Caps?
Because so I'm an alum of the program in which I teach. I graduated from Ithaca College in 2010, and when I was a freshman, one of the upperclassmen somehow coined that nickname, and it stuck so hard that everybody still calls me that.
Here we are 14 years later.
Yeah. I couldn't even tell you who it was. I have it narrowed down to about 2 or 3 people that I think might have been responsible for it, but I'm not sure.
It's a mystery. Well, today we are here to talk about recording guitar. And I thought, let's get the head of the entire sound and recording program from Ithaca College on here to talk about guitar. So
Specifically electric guitar, right?
Specifically electric. Yeah, we'll do electric today. We'll probably bring you back to talk about acoustic.
Cool. Love to. Thanks for having me on the show. Fan of the show, guys.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Hell yeah. We're not going to bring you back to talk about banjo, though. So
I do own a banjo.
I know you do. And I make fun of you every time I see it. It's totally unfounded, too. You play it well.
I fake it.
So, where should we start?
Well, I think since, this is about educating folks who might not have a lot of experience recording electric guitars, I think maybe we could talk about, what engineers should keep in mind while recording electric guitars. The first question I have for you is, what is the guitar player thinking about that they want the engineer to do?
Well, sometimes I have the brain of an engineer on, and sometimes I get to just be a guitar player. More often than not, I find myself doing both to some degree.
Yeah.
Because you kind of end up doing where your skills lie in double multitasking, where your skills can be used in multiple ways. But it's a treat to just be able to be a guitar player for the day. And in that case, I think the guitar player is thinking about a lot of the same sorts of things that the engineer is thinking about, but from a completely different side of the microphone.
Yeah.
Guitar and audio, electric guitar at least, it's really the same concepts. It's the same sorts of issues with gain structure, tone structure, EQ, compression, there's harmonic distortion, there's dynamic range, and there's a chain of processors that you as the guitar player become acquainted with as part of an extension of your instrument, right? So I think as a player, you are pretty intimately familiar with your chain, your side of that signal flow and gain structure, and you want the engineer to take what you're handing off and meet you in the middle and represent that
Yeah.
well, right, to facilitate it. And if I'm the guitar player, not the engineer, I don't really care what the engineer is doing. I just want it to sound great when it comes back out of the speakers.
Right.
I want it to sound like my tone, and I want it to feel right to me. I don't want there to be something interrupting that that connection from hands to speaker that I'm used to feeling. If there's something technical that I'm not responsible for that makes it not feel right.
Now, if something's not feeling right, or if you suspect the engineer is doing something that you don't like, or maybe there's like a bad cable somewhere where you speak up and say, "Hey, I'm not really digging the tone. You know, can we just work on it a little bit more?" Or
I think that's really important for musicians to do across the board is to speak up whenever something isn't sounding and feeling right in a way that prompts a polite response.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, right,
'cause there's if I go to the other end of the engineer mind, one of my biggest pet peeves is when somebody who I know knows something about audio tries to speak the technical language and explain technically what's wrong or technically what I should do to make it better. I don't, as an engineer, want to hear that. I want to hear what does it sound like to you,
yeah,
and how would you like it to be different? What am I not providing right now in terms of the quality of sound or the way it feels? Not, hey man, can you take out 3 dB at 2K?
yeah, right.
So
Yeah, it's like, who's this guy? So you want to engineer this thing? Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and maybe I do need to take 2 dB out of at 3K, but
right.
I'd rather hear.
But you need to come to that yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah. Tell me, hey, it's just sounding a little nasally.
yeah,
Can you maybe soften is it the upper mid range or something like that? I mean, that's okay. Some
yeah.
general terminology like that. So
Right, like maybe move the microphone to the outside of the speaker a little bit more, or something like that.
yeah,
Those
if
type of
you're able to
suggestions.
express like this is what works for me in the past
Yep.
technically, but you're still allowing the engineer to determine the exact technical prescription
Yeah.
for the issue.
Have you had issues where you are a guitar player and you are working with a different engineer and the sound they're getting is not good?
Yeah, I can't think of a time when it was like really an important recording project where I couldn't come to a resolution with an engineer or something like that. I mean, there are times where in a live scenario, you hear what comes out of the monitor and you're thinking, "Oh, that just ain't right." But
Yeah.
you can't. You got to roll with it.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, but it's like sometimes you just have to have a little bit of a conversation about where the sound's at in your head versus what you're hearing, and
Yeah.
it's I could think of a time where I was tracking something and the engineer it was like a pretty aggressive distorted sound, and I was playing out a Mesa Boogie, and the engineer chose to use just a ribbon mic for it, and it was just coming. What I was hearing was like way too mellow for this, and
Yeah.
I knew that I would be probably mixing the project down the road, so I was able to like say, hey, can we I would have done this either way. Suggest like, hey, what works well for me with this rig is maybe a ribbon and a dynamic. Do you have a 57 around that we could put up on this
Yeah.
too?
Yeah, I was going to bring that point up as an engineer, um, working with a musician who I've never worked with. Even though I may have mic'd that instrument a million times, I'll ask that person, "Hey, how do you like this to be mic'd? Is there a certain thing that I should be going for?" If it's an easy thing like putting in another mic up there or something, or placement, or even just hearing something on the headphones, a little reverb, a little bit more compression in the cans, a little bit of conversation I think goes a long way.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. And it makes somebody feel heard right away.
Yeah, for sure. And that you're open to making a change, because there's a million ways to be doing this. So, and there's not a lot of right ways. I mean, there are a lot of right ways, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Right.
How do you like to mic your guitar cab?
I like, let's see. It depends on the rig as to what might be the first choice. But I'm a fan of two microphones on
Okay.
a
Like a
cab.
dynamic ribbon thing?
Yeah, something two mics contrasting in some way.
Hmm.
Or it might even be I have a 412 cab that has two different types of speakers in it, and each one sounds drastically different. I mean,
For the uninitiated, what is a 412 cab?
oh yeah, thanks for four 12-inch speakers. So that's
Okay, cool.
the when you see the AC/DC rigs and it's the stacks of cabinets that say Marshall on them. Yeah,
Yeah,
those are
with the
412
four
cabs.
speakers in them. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. Almost always closed back, so nothing, no direct access to the rear of the speaker, but closed back sealed cabinets. So
Yep.
I have one that I leave in school, and there are two different types of speakers. Each one sounds very different, even two of the same. And I have two speakers within there that I like to mic with a 57 each because the speakers themselves are so different that they
Yeah.
create a contrast. Two contrasting sounds some way. I find once you get beyond that, unless you're also miking the room, it gets out of hand.
Yeah.
I don't know that you benefit from putting three mics, four mics on a single guitar cab at point blank. And you can't really get too creative with, one mic being a few inches behind if you're not going to be, really intentional about time aligning them.
Hmm.
Because even side by side, you're creating a comb filter somewhere.
Yeah.
There's going to be some phase offset. But yeah, I like a blend of two, even if the tone ends up just being one of them. Could be one on axis, one off, one near the edge of the dust cap, one at a darker point on the cone.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay.
I was going to say something going back. You had mentioned about, engineer mind and musician mind. Do you find that hard to turn off your engineering mind when you're playing?
Actually, no. If it sounds good, if what I'm
Right.
hearing sounds good, then I
Can any of us turn off the engineer mind when it sounds bad?
There's something wrong, and I'm going to figure out what it is.
Yeah. It's worse when you know what it is, but you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
yeah. But I quite like to be able to just turn off the engineer mind. So if it feels good enough, I can just go left brain. Wait, which side of the brain is that? Left brain or right brain? The creative side.
Let's just say creative brain.
The creative side of the brain, and and just stay there.
It's not a neurology podcast. What? So, okay. So, as a guitar player, as an engineer, I feel like guitar players always show up with a lot of effects. And as an engineer, there's part of me is kind of like, why would you do this to me? Because now this is part of I like, how can I fix a bad reverb in post?
Right.
Right?
Or make edits with that reverb bleeding onto the
Yes.
next note, right?
Yeah. How can I change this? But, the guitar player saying, but this is part of the sound.
Yeah.
I have no question. What are your thoughts?
I, I hear. I feel exactly where you're coming from, and as an engineer, yeah, I want. In most cases, so I recorded with Eddie Kramer once, and he looked at my pedal board and just like gave, like daggers of shame coming from his eyes. Like it was like, oh, you wanker, that ought to go just right from the guitar into the head of the amplifier. Get rid of all that shit in the middle. I mean, he said something like that. He called me a wanker about 200 times. And I from an engineer's point, I totally get that. I mean, it's like what in that little stomp box is um, going to do what we can't do another way better, right?
Yeah.
But as a player, I play with the same pedal board all the time. I go to the same sounds. I just flew in a guitar track for a track that Alex was producing, and I recorded it with chorus and reverb on the track. And it was like a mild treatment. I mean, you would never hear that track in the actual production and say, "Wow, there's." I can even tell that there's reverb on that sound. Chorus maybe, but it was like this is the tone that I want for this part.
Yeah.
Let me know if it's not working, but this is how I want it to be represented. To me, that's kind of a critical part of what I'm playing is having that little bit of rub coming from my chorus pedal, and that's the pedal I use to get that sound. So, I think it's okay to bake some stuff in. It's kind of like making a decision to compress or EQ on the way in a tracking situation. It's just that it's backed up to the player to bake that sound in at the tracking stage.
And as a musician and a performer, it probably helps you kind of play a little bit better, I'm sure. If you're loving the sound that's coming out of there, it's not sounding too sterile, little chorus, little reverb, if that gets you in the right zone,
Totally, yeah, because that's the, that, and of course that chorus pedal has its own sort of harmonic thing going on, and that's part of that, like, spank that you get from the instrument, and if it's not on, you're right. The part just doesn't quite feel the same because that's how I'm used to having that feel. So I think it's a good conversation to have engineer and guitar player, especially if you are worried that there is too much going on, that what you're hearing out of the monitors feels that the track won't speak in the mix very well. There's certainly the same as tracking with effects on. There's certainly a case where you can go too far or have a treatment that doesn't work in the mix.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, have you ever been on any sessions where you kind of go in cold to the session, you're not really sure what the music is, and they're just kind of like looking for different tones or sounds out of you, and it's just kind of like, no, we want something more like this, with some reverb and chorus on it, and you say you play with the same pedal board all the time. I'm sure, is it easy for you to pull up, a sound that someone's kind of describing that they want from you?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm looking down at it right now. I can't show you it well, but it's a mix of a couple of individual pedals that do one thing, and then one like multi-unit. I still use a Line 6 M9, which is kind of an older generation multi stomp box modeler. So that's kind of my, like, whatever I need that isn't right under my feet, I can dial something up there and then get close to it. I play a fair amount of musical theater, and that's one of those places where you'll just see something in the book that says a la Andy Summers or something like that, and it's like, okay, police tone, let's see what we can do here, that kind of thing. I mean, I should say I usually play with the same gear. Sometimes it's a single processor that just has everything built in, and you just dial in presets and do that whole thing, but that's not as fun.
That's for the musical theater stuff you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Luke, we did have a question about that on our sheet, right?
Do we?
Your thoughts on amp simulators.
Oh yeah, let's go there.
And those types of boxes like fractals and I forget what other units there are, but what are your feelings about those?
Yeah, actually, I think I should have a guitar in hand and plugged in for some of this.
Feels more comfortable. You're not allowed to start noodling while you're talking, though. Okay.
Oh no, that's
or tuning,
right? That shit is so annoying. Hold on, let me just make sure I have something cool. For instance, that little bit of chorus there. That's kind of my clean thing.
Can you just pause for a minute and let's just talk about your signal flow real quick? Just so we can sort of understand what we're listening to.
Yeah, and then I'll come back around to the model.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about the simulators.
Cool. So I am set up in my little control room in my house.
Do you feel in control?
Sometimes, rarely. So this is kind of a hybrid analog digital rig that I've got here. I'm going from my guitar into a pedal board with a wah, a compressor that's pretty much always on, a couple of overdrives, a multi-effect unit, chorus, there's a reverb, an EQ, a couple things like that. I'm going into a 50-watt tube Marshall head. It's a Marshall JVM 205, so it's the smaller 50-watt version. And I've got a couple of other amps in the room, but that's the one with the widest range of colors that I've chosen to plug into right now. That has a speaker cab, a 212 speaker cab beneath it, but I'm not actually making any sound out of that. The power amp output from the head is going into a universal audio aux box, which is a adaptive attenuator and load box, which is designed to take the output of a tube head, which, I'll pause for a quick service announcement here. Never plug the output of a tube guitar head into anything that doesn't explicitly say, please plug the output of a tube guitar head in here.
Kabam.
Yeah.
Because
Blammo!
you will damage whatever you plugged it into, but before you damage that, you'll probably destroy the head itself. One of those two things will fry first, and probably both will not be around tomorrow. It's the quickest way to burn up the most expensive components in a tube head to not have a proper load attached to it. Even if there's nothing plugged in at all, that's one of the worst things for a tube head. If that thing is on and off of standby, then it needs to have the proper load on its output. So that's what this box does, and it also has built-in modeling for speakers, cabs, and microphones, and actually a room as well. So it's like a amp modeler that starts its job after the output stage of a real tube amplifier. That is going spit-if out into my Apollo X4. Downside to the Apollo or the aux is that it only outputs 44.1, so I'm doing sample rate conversion on the way in. Whatever, sounds fine. And now it's part of my channel, or it's part of my signal in my Apollo mixer.
I was going to say something about the aux box is great for a home situation or a situation where you can't be turning your cabinet on and disturb your neighbors or your wife or your girlfriend, whoever's sleeping next to you, and still get that sound that represents the guitar still going through a cabinet.
Yes. Yeah. You're still going through a real head. There's still an output transformer in there. And, that's still one of those things where I can be perfectly happy with the sound that I get out of the aux for a record. To get back to the question of amp modelers, they're great. I use them a lot. I probably gig with amp modelers more than real amplifiers these days. And I even have a pedal on my pedal board. It's one of the Universal Audio UAFX series. It's the Vox AC30 emulator. It's called the Ruby. That thing is brilliant, and you can use it with a real amp where you turn the cabinet simulation off.
Yeah.
So I love that thing. It is incredibly convincing. I think in this generation of amp modelers, we are there where the product is almost indistinguishable from the real thing. But given the option, I would still prefer to have a real amplifier with real gain staging that feels right, that I can grab and dial in and record with that, and not be going through a user interface on an amp modeler.
Yeah. Now, this might be a side, but when you're recording, do you like to be in the room with the amp pushing air if you are recording with a real amp? Or do you like to be separate in a separate room, just hearing it through the cans?
I would rather be in the control room in most cases, because that's going to be a much easier communication route, especially if we're, dropping in and doing chunks of stuff, and I have to do a few bars here, a few bars there, and can really quickly interface with the engineer. And if they're able to move really quickly, that's a great dynamic. I can hear exactly what it's sounding like out of the speakers. That can be Maybe sometimes annoying for the engineer because I do like it loud when I'm playing electric
Yeah.
guitar because that feels it feels wrong if it's not loud. So that's possibly I'd rather be in the sweet spot of the
Yeah.
speakers, right? But there are times where you lose something really important in your sound if you don't have a loud cabinet in the room with you because the guitar is now not hearing any of its own signal. So there have been times where I will, if I'm recording with an aux and it's a direct, signal like that, I will still pump signal through a cab in the room that's not mic'd just so I can get the feedback
Hmm.
into the instrument.
Interesting. And does that help like vibrate the strings in a in a more natural way as if you were playing right next to the amp? Is that kind of what's happening as far as like when you say feedback?
Could probably demo that here. Um, so,
That's the Gibson I've always wanted.
okay. Let me mute my mic for a second. That'll just keep going forever,
Yeah.
right?
You're not getting that sort of sustain without that.
Right. Yeah. There's just. I mean, it's a sign of the times. There are pedals now that are feedback creator pedals that I've seen on people's boards that are designed to do that. They,
Wow.
they they take the sustain and then they produce a harmonic overtone of it to simulate the feeling of a loud a really loud amp. That's not even that loud. I mean, I had my in-ears in, but that was maybe like 95 dB in the room right now. But when I'm playing this thing on a stage where it's like 110 dB on stage, like yeah, your sustain is infinite.
Yeah.
It can get out of control, but if you're cutting a solo and you need that long note to just sustain, or the guitar just doesn't feel right without having that energy coming into it, then you do need something to activate that. So like those you listen to those Cream records or certain. I'm trying to think of some other examples that you can just like Santana. Like you can't listen to a Santana record and not hear just how freaking loud the amp is in that
Yeah.
room. That's creating that sustain. So that can be a really important part that gets lost if we're just in a clinical environment and don't have a loud amp in the room.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out your signal flow right now. From your head, you're going into the aux box. Are you also going into a cab right now?
Yeah, the Auxbox has a speaker output on it as
Okay.
well. So there's a 5-stage attenuator on there. Well, six
Okay.
stage that goes from 0 to 5, where 5 is about 3 dB shy of what full on would be. You can't actually get a clear pass through without the attenuator hitting it at all. But it gives you these attenuated versions of the output.
So the idea of the aux box is that it'll do the digitizing of the audio. It'll make the audio feel like it's going through a cab, but then you can use it as a simulator. And also at the same time, you can plug it into an actual cab so that you can do these effects like you're talking about, these feedback effects.
And
Interesting.
there's this great app that gives you your cabinet and speaker
Oh,
simulation.
Okay.
nice.
So right now we're hearing this is they can't tell you exactly what it's modeling, but it's a 112 cabinet with a GB30, which is obviously for guitar players a Celestion Greenback 30-watt speaker and a ribbon 121, and a condenser 67, if you can figure out what those might be.
No, I do not know. Condenser 67. I've never heard of it. So that's cool. So it's like an app for your iPad or whatever, and then you can like do your modeling right there.
Yeah, the box has a access point in it, so you get on the Wi-Fi network and take it away.
In terms of your signal flow of your pedal board, how guitar players will set up their pedal board, and that's sort of the order of operations that it stays in. One thing plugs into the next, and for the most part, it sort of stays that way for a long time. How do you choose the order, and how do you choose an order that is so successful you stay married to it for such a long time?
Ah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Cool. So there's some general guidelines that that follow suit, and it's the same sort of principles that dictate where we put certain types of processors in a recording chain. So I like to have a wah at the very front and a compressor right after that, because wahs do a lot to the overall output volume because it's a resonant filter that's moving around. So a compressor is a nice thing to have after that to help control that. I'm a player that always likes to play with a compressor on. That's like the pedal that never gets turned off for me. It's dialed in really it's gently, but it's always doing something.
Can you demo the wah pedal for us?
Yeah, sure.
You gotta switch guitar sounds? Oh, okay. So the wah wah wah, that was you moving your foot up and down on the pedal.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that one's one of the more expression oriented pedals, so you can actually control
Uh-huh.
the envelope. And then so that's feeding a pedal that's modeling at 1176. So you can hear a little bit of the 1176 spank on that. And then after that, that's going into a couple of overdrives. So if I hit an overdrive pedal, I'll probably be clipping the amp here, but... And there's just the clean signal.
Was that one overdrive and then two overdrives, or was that choice one overdrive and choice two?
That was one, and then another.
And then adding an overdrive. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a few options for multiple dirt stages here.
Over, drive.
Yeah. But yeah, they can be used separately or together. And then it's wah, compressor, drives, and then after that, modulation. So I have a chorus after that. Then it goes into the multi-effects unit, and that's where I would usually use that for other types of modulation, flanger or envelope filter. So that's doing an octave and an envelope filter. I've got a delay on here for when I want to do a dotted eighth, because I want to feel like the edge. This has a good tap tempo on it. And then it goes out to the UA Ruby I was talking about. So it's actually a pretty ingenious pedal. It has a what they call a four cable method mode, where when you turn the pedal on, it will take the signal from the input and route it into the return of your effects loop rather than the input of the amp. So now this becomes the preamp section now. And then the rest of the pedals are in the effects loop of the amp. So the effects loop is what engineers would think of as an insert on
Yep.
a channel.
Hmm. Okay.
So there's a send and return on the amp, and anything that you would want to have affected after the preamp section of the amplifier would come in the effects loop. There's a clear distinction would be like a delay, for instance. So if I have a delay affecting a dirty, distorted guitar sound, if that delay is coming before the distortion, then the repeats on that delay are not going to have the same harmonic distortion on them because
Because it'll be quieter.
it'll get quieter, right?
Yeah.
So, my signal is a little noisy today. So what you hear there is the repeats just become cleaner. They don't really become quieter, and then they get thinner and just kind of disappear. Turn that on one more time. That's because the delay is before the preamp section of the amplifier where all of that gain
Right.
staging is happening, right? So, but I have a delay that is in the effects loop, and if I use that one, so I've still retained the sound of the distortion in those repeats. So
Right,
that's
right.
why we would use an effects loop to affect that part of the signal rather than just having it all being processed on the way in. I also have a lot of gain on there. That's a very dirty sound.
I was gonna say, why are you so dirty tonight, Caps?
I feel like you've got your work cut out for you editing this one. Sorry.
Oh, it'll be something. Gonna have to leave it all in, unfortunately.
Now I'm going to ask the dreaded question, which I think everyone's going to say no to. But do you ever record a DI with your electric guitar setup through an amp,
Do I ever record
like a direct signal from the guitar amp, either pre or post effects? Ever?
without some sort of speaker modeling in there?
Yes. Well, I mean, I've been on situations where you have your guitar setup going through your guitar amp and you're getting that signal picked up with microphones and such, but they'll also take a direct signal either before and or after the effects pedals. You know what I'm saying? Like you do like a split, you know.
Gotcha. Actually, yes. In my opinion, maybe not an always because I don't always, but I at least preach to my students that they should take a clean DI before any of the pedals, any of the processing, any of the amplifier when they're recording guitars, because should they have to reamp it, should they need to find a different tone, should something go wrong downstream where that they didn't notice in the session, then they have a clean signal to come back to.
Yep.
So that is a terrific idea to take a DI and then just take the through out of the DI into the guitar rig and record everything as normal, but have that clean DI
Yeah.
so that you can work with it later.
Now, is that something that you do on sessions?
Yes, I actually an example. I had a band that I worked with on a couple records, and on the most recent one, one of the guitar players, had just recently gotten a Line 6 Helix, and it was new to him. And as soon as I heard the sounds that were coming out of it, I was like, "Ooh, we don't really have the time to dial in these tones because we just kind of roll with it." But this is he hasn't really got his head around it yet.
Yeah.
So I took a DI before the input of the Helix with the thought of, okay, we'll get through the session, we'll have a good day here, but I am not using very much of the tones that I'm getting from this thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't. I reamped. I used software modelers. I blended some of the Helix in if it was something that was really working or had the right character, and I was using those sounds to inform what I was going with in my other processing. But that was one of those session savers type
Yeah.
things because we would have been there all day, going through patches because he had really, made some patches that were ready to go for the day. But, it just the gain structure in there, like it was like clipping internally in some places, and there was no getting it fixed in a place where it would really make final sounds.
Right, and keeping the session on schedule. Right. Now I've used DI in the past for like rock guitar sessions, and they and the idea was to never ever listen to that in a million years, but it was a session where everything was on the grid. So like they'd finish a song, they'd comp all the takes, and they'd have a second engineer on another Pro Tools rig, beat detective, everything, drums, guitar, bass, and everything. And if you've recorded distorted electric guitars, you lose all the transients and you can't see where you're strumming. So we've used the DI as kind of like the transient marker for the beat detective.
Totally. Yeah. I've anytime I've had to edit and I've got the DI there, you always look at the DI
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So there's only good things to come out of having that DI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's one more input? I mean,
Yeah, right, exactly. These days, forget about it.
yeah.
Forget about it. Caps, who's your favorite guitarist?
Jimmy Page is the reason I play guitar. So I love Jimmy. I love Pat Metheny. I'm super inspired by Brian Hayner from Avenged Sevenfold and the dudes from Periphery. I think they are some of the most technically and musically brilliant players in the modern metal scene. Um, I'm a classically trained guitar player, so I've got my idols like Jason Vio from the classical guitar scene. Studied with him for a few years. I just gave you like 9 favorites.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Awesome.
You should have more than one. Having one would be suspicious.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was just like, yeah, man, who would be that like suspicious choice? Like,
John Mayer.
yeah, John. Yeah, exactly.
I say that tongue in cheek because I have so much respect for him as a guitar player. He's incredible.
I know.
Dude,
I know.
and his
We all know
band.
that. Yeah,
John Mayer Trio, like holy crap, man.
Yeah.
yeah. No, he is fantastic. But we all know that guy that like only listens to John Mayer, right?
Yeah. I mean, that was me in college. It's fine. I know who I was.
Now we all knew who you were.
Look. It's fine. It's part of me. I've moved on. Should we ask one more question?
I do like that final question that you have here.
That's my final question. I like to ask our guests, what they've done wrong. What's something that you used to do wrong when recording electric guitar that you had to learn the hard way not to do anymore?
So I think a big one that, sorry,
He's switching guitars.
a big one that I know that I've definitely done wrong and that I often see students fall into the same trap is not getting the distortion sound right in recording, because that's one thing that you really can't change after the fact. Whatever amount of harmonic distortion you bake into a recorded guitar sound, that's the sound of that guitar. You can't really wind on more dirt after the fact because it's not going to be at the same point of the gain stage. It's not going to be, it's not coming through the speaker, which is extremely impactful in the overall EQ of the sound. It's just not going to work to try to grit something up after the fact. And we all know you can't take distortion out of a signal and just magically make it cleaner. It's easy to record your cleans too clean and to record your dirties too dirty. Often a slightly gritty clean sound is going to speak better in the mix than the really glassy, shimmery clean sound, unless we're going for, that, to go back to the Police, that Roland Jazz 30, extremely bright, clean sort of thing. And when it comes to the heavy tones, they often need to be cleaner than you think to work well in the mix. And especially with heavier styles of music, for rhythm guitars, you could be surprised as to how heavy a not all that distorted sound can be. So if you're recording your rhythm metal guitars and they sound like this, I might think, oh, wow, yeah, that sounds huge. It's like mega distorted. And that is just going to turn into psh.
Yes, just like it's an aggravated white noise.
Yeah, and it's like, guitar players feel better about themselves when they have a lot of gain on because it covers up some, deficiencies in your playing, and it feels, especially if it's loud, it feels powerful. But that can just kind of be a trashy tone versus. That's still distorted. It's kind of choked on the bottom end, and it's a lot more articulate, but that's going to work better in the context of a mix because there's actual dynamic content to speak in the mid range. It's not just fuzz.
Yeah, that definitely seems like it cut through a lot better.
It also seems manageable too, right? You can compress that, you can EQ that a little bit better.
Yeah, and I mean, I would work on that some more. I just turned the gain way down from that, bobber fest that I had. But so that's one where when students have done projects and I've listened back to the guitar sounds, if they just went too far with the gain, my first question will be, did you take a DI? And can you reamp it? Because that tone is just not going to work. It's just too fuzzy.
So don't overdo it.
Yeah. Don't overdo it, but also sometimes guitar players are often used to hearing their sound from an amp that is sitting on a stage that's firing at the back of their legs. I always keep a stand so that my amp's elevated and pointed at my ears, but you rarely hear the sound that's coming out of your amp. So you're inclined to make it more distorted for distorted tones and brighter so that you can hear it over everything else.
Brighter because it's what you're describing, it's off axis from your ears.
You don't have ears on your legs.
Right. Yeah.
So when you hear your amp mic'd up for the first time, you might not recognize the tone because that's not what you're used to hearing, but that is what's coming out of your speaker. And for clean sounds, you might find it actually sounds dirtier than you thought it did because that microphone is picking up all the harmonic content that's coming right off of the cone. And a little bit of a dirty clean tone, that's a good thing too, because that natural compression and harmonic juice is going to stick to other things nicely in the mix.
I like it. I dig it.
Yeah, I love that.
So not too clean, not too dirty. Everything should be
medium rare.
Clean. Yeah.
Tyler, any final thoughts or questions?
I don't. I feel very well informed now about electric guitar.
Yeah. I think I can't learn anything more about electric guitar right now.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk at you guys for however long this podcast ends up being.
Well, you take out a few ums, you take out a few uhs, you trim a couple
minutes. We're at
minutes
53
off.
minutes, so I'd say 45.
Yeah.
Maybe 48.
Thank you for answering all the questions that we were too afraid to ask until an hour ago.
Thanks for having me, guys. This was a lot of fun.
We'd love to have you back.
Oh yeah,
Yep.
I'd love to be back. I like talking about audio and stuff.
You clearly know a thing or two.
Our next podcast with Caps and stuff.
Cool. Well, Tyler, great to finally meet you, man.
Yeah, same here. I've heard a lot about you. All good things, I promise.
No, that's not true. There was the one thing. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Catch you next time.
See ya.